Hello and welcome to our second day of our Gwent Whole Schools approach to emotional wellbeing training. Today we'll be introducing the spiral of inquiry. You'll be pleased to know that this session is a little bit shorter than day one, and we have tried to make it a bit more practical for you.
The attendees of the live version of this training were able to collaborate in breakout rooms together to apply their learning to a vignette. And the feedback from these activities are included in this training.
Okay, so before we move on to exploring the stages of the spiral of inquiry in turn, we wanted to present you with a vignette to hold in mind during this process. So the vignette says, COVID has spanned 2 academic years now. We have children moving between key stages and classes and forming new relationships with teachers and education staff. Parents and carers are also managing new relationships. As a staff team, you've held closely in mind the impact on connection across the school community. To comply with COVID restrictions, you have just delivered a virtual parents' evening. As with other years, you've collected feedback from teachers, parents, carers, and pupils on their experiences of this. The information gathered this year suggests pupils found it more positive than last year. However, parents, carers, and teachers found it significantly less positive. So this is the vignette we're going to hold in mind and explore when we think about the stages of the spiral of inquiry. But it's important to say you'll need to bring in your own information from your school community to this. Use the vignette a bit as a skeleton and bring in information from your experiences, from situations that may have occurred within your school community to really help it come to life as we explore the different stages of the spiral of inquiry. And the first of these stages is scanning. So scanning is the first of the 6 stages of the spiral of inquiry, and it's when we welcome curiosity and leave all assumptions at the door. We want to know what's really happening in the school community through scanning, and we ask that members of the scanning team leave any ideas of what we are getting right, what we're not getting right, what we might need to do to improve out of their heads when they approach scanning. Curiosity is going to be the driver for change, and this works best when everyone involved approaches scanning with an open mind and with no preconceptions of what is going to come out. It's when we find out what's going on for members of our school community. We thought it would be helpful to start by just presenting this table of what scanning is and what it's not. So scanning is an inquiry and evidence-seeking mindset. It's taking a wide perspective on wellbeing, and it involves finding out what is happening for all members of the community from their own perspectives. Scanning is not about seeking evidence to reinforce the status quo or indeed our own assumptions. It's not simply a focus on aspects of wellbeing that are easily measured, and it's not only about what professionals think. So why scan? In developing the 5 components of wellbeing model, we came to understand that it is when one of the components is not realised or experienced in a meaningful way that ruptures can occur, that a sense of unhappiness can be fostered. And so when we look at our school, it might be that there are situations when either feedback we've received indicates that there might be more going on that meets the eye, or perhaps that something just doesn't feel right, that we're perhaps not meeting one of these components of wellbeing, and that might be leading to the issues that we're experiencing. So often the reason to choose to initiate a spiral, to start to scan, is because of a gut feeling that we're not quite getting something, that we're missing something. It then becomes about the invitation for curiosity and creativity, an invitation to think differently, to think broadly, and to connect across all areas of your community. At its centre is the inclusion of all members of the school community. So when looking at the vignette and thinking about scanning, the process is one of holding in mind these 5 components of wellbeing, which you can see centrally within the diagram on your screen, and asking these 3 overarching questions in relation to how the situation might be impacting on these components of wellbeing. So what is going on for our school community in relation to wellbeing? How do we know, and why does it matter? So moving on to the how do we do scanning? We need to create contexts for feedback and information gathering. We need to ask broad questions. What's going on for members of our community? How do we know and why does it matter? We need to listen to the information and we need to reflect on the information gathered. As we said, scanning is a real opportunity for creativity. So in creating context for feedback for information gathering, it's important to look at how you might capture this from across the whole of your community to ensure all voices are heard. Are there some members of your community, for example, who might need to draw their feelings down or to have support with communicating these? Is there a way of outsourcing some of the process of gathering feedback, perhaps through the use of questionnaires that are emailed more broadly, so that you can make sure you're collecting a really big range of feedback within the scanning process? Think creatively about the different ways that you gather feedback at the moment within your school community and what other opportunities there might be to collect even more. Okay, so we're now going to invite you to take part in an activity. For this, you'll need your scanning activity sheet, which has a summary of some of the core components of scanning in it, as well as a copy of the vignette that we showed you earlier on in the training session. So what we're going to ask you to do is to remind yourselves of the content of the vignette and to start practicing how you would scan this information. Perhaps think about where you would gather additional information from, who you would ask, how you would ask questions relating to this vignette in order to broaden your understanding of the situation, in order to start to answer that question, what's going on for members of our school community. You'll see in your guide that the table, how we do scanning, what scanning is and what scanning is not, have been included. So use these as your guides when completing the activity and spend 10 to 15 minutes just having a think about how you would gather additional information within this scanning phase. This would be a good point to pause the training session so that you can come back to playing the recording once you've completed this exercise. Having completed this exercise, we'd ask you to spend a bit of time talking among your colleagues about your experiences of it. How did you go about scanning the vignette? How did you decide who needed to be involved? And what are your thoughts about scanning as the first step of the spiral of inquiry? Again, this would be a good moment to just pause the training and have a discussion around this. So we thought it would be helpful to share some of the feedback from the activity that we ran during the live training session, so you can see what other people thought and felt about the scanning activity. So group 3 agreed that you need to use a variety of methods to collect information from the whole school community in order to enable everyone in the community to engage in the process. There were comments that it's vital that we have a person-centred approach for the whole school community, so that's for parents, pupils and teachers. There was a reflection that sometimes people don't have the confidence to approach us or to answer the phone, and getting families involved really is vital in considering the various backgrounds and needs of all age groups. Someone reflected that perhaps they could do a scan before the scan, so they could start by thinking about what format or method might work best for their communication to each group and collect some information about the preferences of the group in relation to how they'd like to be contacted. There were comments about establishing trusting relationships as being the key to success within scanning. And this, I think, speaks to our understanding that scanning works best when there really is an open communication, where dialogue feels safe, and that there are numerous ways for having conversations within a school community. So reflection was that new classes, new parents in our COVID world might prevent our usual ways of connecting with the community. And so perhaps it's about thinking how else can you offer moments of connection in order to foster that sense of a meaningful working relationship. Another group reflected that the well-being of teachers has to be the place to start, acknowledging their sense that you can't always nurture pupils or parents without making sure that the staff team have been looked after. Each teacher needs to be looked after as an individual, and strong and stable relationships between SLT and staff members are going to be one of the keys to enabling that to happen, really emphasising the importance of the relationships within their feedback. Another member of the training felt that the staff experience of the process is one of the key things that may impact on parents and child perception. So we've highlighted here some questions we could ask in order to make it a better experience. What can we do to help you? What should it look like? What can we do to get it right for you? And how did it feel, perhaps as being central to this example of scanning? Right, so on to the second stage of the spiral of inquiry, which is focusing. And focusing is where we hold this central question in mind: where will concentrating our energies make the most difference? We think it's important to clarify here that focusing is still very much in the explorative stage of the spiral. We're still interested in what's going on within your school community, and it's important that we resist the urge to jump straight into making changes. Resisting this urge can be difficult. It will take courage, patience, and trust in one another to really engage in this process as it's meant to be. But it's also imperative that we try not to focus on everything at once. Take your time with focusing. As with scanning then, we thought it would be helpful to present a slide on what focusing is and what it's not. So focusing uses information from the scan to identify an area for concentrated team learning and action. Focusing usually requires collection of further information to ensure that there's an accurate understanding of the situation forming. And it builds on strengths as well as gaining clarity on challenges. Ultimately, focusing is about identifying common areas that people can buy into. Focusing is not the time to introduce completely new ideas disconnected from the scanning process. It's not about assuming you've got it all figured out and you don't need to investigate any further. And it's not just about problems or challenges, and nor is it just about everyone choosing their own area of interest to focus in on. We can think of focusing as continuing the journey from scanning with the aim of figuring out the direction which we're going to take. As part of the focusing process, we unpick and reflect on the information given to us during scanning and get to grips with what the community is telling us about their own well-being. As part of the focusing process, you may set up theme-finding groups consisting of representatives from your community to help with unpicking and reflection. The aim of these groups or workshops might be to identify the themes that will emerge from the data collected. Ultimately, the focusing phase requires us to ask, where are we going to focus and concentrate our energies so that we can change the experiences and outcomes for members of our school community? So how do we do focusing then? So in order to do focusing, we might ask ourselves, what's missing? What do we need? We might ask, what are our strengths? Are there areas for further development that are already emerging? Which theme or idea is going to have the biggest impact on wellbeing in our community? And what can we do to achieve this? So this might be thinking about resources, thinking about attitudes and timescales. It can be as broad as the scanning information has taken you. So as with scanning, we're going to break off and give you a little bit of time to explore focusing using the vignette example. And in order to make this come to life, we've provided you with a bit of an update here. So your scanning showed a significant difference between staff members in terms of experiences of virtual delivery. Of all groups of staff, teachers reported it to be the most challenging. Parents reported a sense of disconnect, and pupils' responses were more varied than initially thought. Some pupils found the format to be positive, whereas other pupils reported feeling they weren't able to cover all of the things they wanted to due to the strict time changes. So when you take this vignette away, you're really holding in mind the questions presented within the How Do We Do focusing guide, as well as again the what focusing is and what focusing is not, that you'll have a reminder of in your guide sheet. And we're going to ask with this information, where and how would you focus in now? So we're now going to invite you to pause this training, use your guide sheet on focusing and just explore the vignette a little bit more, trying to enact the focusing lens of the spiral of inquiry. Hopefully that exercise has enabled focusing to come to life a little bit more for you. When we delivered this training in the live session, After attendees came back from the breakout rooms, we asked for a little bit of feedback, focusing on where did you find yourself focusing in? How did you decide who needed to be involved when you started focusing in? And what are your thoughts about focusing as the second step of the spiral of inquiry? So we thought it would be helpful, as with scanning then, to end by sharing some of the feedback that we received from the focusing activity when we did it in the live training. So the first one noted the significant difference between the teachers, so the length of time spent on that part of the spiral, and these respondents suggested you'd want to talk again to parents. Children made comments. We don't often ask children what their agenda is for Parents' Evening, was a reflection from this school, but it felt really important to realise that this could be a route for focusing in. Other comments were around wanting to know why was it challenging, acknowledging they'd have to sit to investigate further and find out why is it some staff were okay and others weren't, and curiosity about whether this was to do with age or skills or perhaps stage of teaching career. Other comments noting that staff experience of the process may have impacted on parents and child perceptions, and perhaps there's something to do with kind of lacking in confidence. Is this a rupture in efficacy or in safety? Perhaps there was both playing out in what was going on and what was being seen. There were reflections that establishing trusted relationships seemed to be the key to success. That there were new classes, perhaps new parents in our COVID world, and that might present some of the usual ways of connecting with our community, and a curiosity as to whether that could have been impacting on the feedback being received. So again, this might be a helpful time just to pause the training, have a read through these in full, and to see how well they aligned with your reflections on focusing as the second part of the spiral of inquiry.